Battletech has always had a footprint in digital entertainment. Interestingly, even when it was first conceived in 1984, Jordan Weissman, one of the founders of FASA, had envisioned a digital immersive experience for the title from the very start, wanting it to be a virtual in-person experience. Something that interestingly not only led to Battletech pods, but also led pretty concretely to the Mechwarrior franchise as a whole. And even in between these points, there were digital experiences for the franchise throughout, going as far back as the Battletech Crescent Hawks PC video game. Since these beginnings, barring around a 10-ish year period after the decline of the franchise with Mech Assault 2, the setting has always had a footprint in gaming spaces. While the games are not at the height of where they were during the Mechwarrior 2 era, there were always Battletech products abound. The PvP-centric Mechwarrior Online, the sandbox single-player cooperative Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries, harebrained schemes, much-beloved turn-based tactics and management game Battletech, and the more traditional Mechwarrior 5 Clans are all the more recent titles for the game over the last 10+ years. In a relatively new interview between No Guts No Galaxy and Russ Bullock, Russ being the head of Piranha Games, the current licensee that creates Mechwarrior content, he discussed some of the difficulties the franchise is facing, and a potential path they see to perhaps doing something with an almost forgotten, but much beloved part of Battletech history in PC gaming. Today I want to talk to all of you about Mechcommander, and why I think we need Mechcommander to make a return, and how it can, in my opinion, revitalize Battletech in the digital space. But first, let us do a bit of a rundown of how things currently are within that very space. Mechwarrior, at one time in the 1990s, was a franchise that stood amongst the titans like StarCraft, or even Diablo. It's almost hard to imagine that Mechwarrior 2 was that big, but at the time, it was enormous. Hey, I can tell you, I was there for it, man, and it was everywhere. Every store that remotely carried electronics or video games sold it in some way, and they sold it constantly. It's the biggest success in the entire franchise's history, but the wheel turns, and Mechwarrior 3 was not a particularly high seller despite following Mechwarrior 2. Funnily enough, there was a real marketing campaign behind Mechwarrior 3, as it was clearly thought it was going to be as big as, like, Mechwarrior 2, and, the outcome, might be self-evident, as there is a reason why I'm making this video here today. Mechwarrior 4 Vengeance and its extra titles do seem to have done a little bit better than 3, from what public information I was able to gather, and from the general footprint it had, but it still paled in comparison to 2. This may even explain the pivot to Mech Assault, which, funnily enough, fared about as well as Mechwarrior 4 upon its launch. But Mech Assault 2, from what public information I can find, slipped heavily and sold around 60 or 70% of what its predecessor had. Ergo, why you did not get Mech Assault 3, and why the franchise went into torpor. This is a brief window into the rocky history of the franchise without going too deep into the licensing and ownership. I'm just trying to build a picture for everyone to see. Mechwarrior Online came after a failed attempt to relaunch Mechwarrior 5 by Smith & Tinker, a company that Jordan Weissman founded. When Piranha Games, the company they'd partnered with, decided to soldier on after this iteration of the title simply couldn't move ahead. This is the beginning of the modern Mechwarrior video game franchise. MWO as a game was very much modeled on World of Tanks as far as its business model is concerned, and it is very much of that era. It's in the business of selling freemium experiences in order to justify the game. As an approach, this is increasingly dated and likely won't be replicated in future titles. But things continued on after MWO. Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries arrived first at Epic Games Store after it became a paid exclusive by Epic Games for a window of around a year. 16 months later, Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries came to Steam and started to do quite well. As of right now, it's the second most popular Mechwarrior game in history, having sold somewhere between 1 and 2 million copies. That's probably about twice as popular as Mechwarrior 4, for instance. The game seems to have been much more modeled on Mechwarrior 1 though, which was more kind of procedurally generated, and involves people more or less doing a series of quests to build up funds to improve their lance, in order to build up their funds, and etc. Now, Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries did incorporate more story-oriented campaigns throughout its life, allowing for micro-campaigns to be played with built-up lances that take players into the Succession Wars, Clan Invasion, and as of now, the Late Clan Invasion. The DLC has done well enough that even now, there is more DLC in the pipeline for Mercenaries. While I'm not particularly a fan of procedurally generated games typically myself, it is a very popular market, and it's the clear model the franchise will likely follow for some time going forwards. HBS Battletech even, another loved game, despite having quite a deep story-driven campaign in DLC, is also a sandbox procedurally generated game in the same way, with a very similar set of mechanics built around building up one's lance, to acquire better gear, to fight better missions, to build up one's lance. Funnily enough, Harebrained Schemes Battletech is another successful entry in the franchise. People have been starved for a sequel even, though that is very much not possible for a variety of reasons, some of which seem to be caused by things like the Fates being unnecessarily cruel. These are also reasons that this video is not about, so we're moving on. Mechwarrior 5 Clans was a return to the origins of the franchise's success. It fell into a similar era as Mechwarrior 2 in the Battletech franchise. It explored the only one of the big four clans that wasn't originally touched on in the old Mechwarrior 2 titles. It gave us a story around the clan most responsible for the invasion, and showed a conflicted star, forced to choose what path they'd eventually follow. I personally loved it. It was a traditional Mechwarrior experience, with fun gameplay, outside of a few flying bosses I didn't really enjoy, and it had a great story and characters. The cinematics were fantastic as well, and the game was beautiful too. This game deserved to do well. The only main problem it seems to have suffered from was the infamous Unreal 5 engine difficulties with older hardware. But all the same, the game appears to have not broken even. There are an abundance of reasons for this. First, it came out shortly after Space Marine 2, which sucked all of the oxygen out of the room in terms of people's attention. I know, I was there for it. Second, it was directly on Game Pass at release. Once more, for a variety of reasons we won't get into. But Piranha made little to no revenue on anything on Game Pass. This, for a single-player and cooperative, narrative-driven game, slaughtered its potential. Huge numbers of players played it on Game Pass, and then never bought the game. The other reason might involve marketing, with some people thinking it was a DLC for Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries, and kind of passing on it due to that. The reasons matter, but they don't change the results. With the interview between Russ and No Guts No Galaxy, hearing what the approximate budgets of these games are, if you think there is another big studio on the way to bail things out, I'm going to tell you something. That will absolutely not happen. If Piranha drops this or disappears, the franchise will literally fall into an abyss, digitally, that it may never climb out of. And if it does, I'll be a retiree by the time we get anything meaningful again. And that's provided the game industry doesn't continue to mutate into something unrecognizable. PGI has been very fair in their pricing around Mechwarrior 5 in general from what I've seen, going from their core games to their DLCs. MWO followed a different model I might rate a little bit differently, but that's not their main game at the moment. I'd actually say PGI has been more honorable than a fair number of gaming companies that are their peers. Also, even when they have made missteps, like with one of the early Mechwarrior 5 Clans DLCs, they've responded by pulling back from that poor decision. That's a good thing. They listened to their audience. These are positive steps, and shows the company is trying to do right by people and actually want their players to embrace their products. I know the most cynical among you will disagree for a variety of reasons, and all companies are, in truth, just trying to get your money, but there are ways they can try to do that, and PGI has not in recent years been the most vicious when it comes to this type of stuff. I know almost no one at PGI, I should also make clear. I don't even support every single Mechwarrior release, as sometimes things just aren't for me, like Wolves of Tukiet, or even some of the Mercenaries-related content. I am in no way sponsored by PGI either, to be clear, and I've never had an affiliate deal with them either. But I need to stress, Mechwarrior 5 Clan's core game being a disappointment is not good. It's not good because it hurts everything going forwards. This was not something to be celebrated. This is also something I've said in public since it looked like the game's sales were weak. I predicted that it would actually be very bad for Mechwarrior going forward, and it looks like I was right. It makes it harder to get new Mechwarrior or Battletech games in general, from anyone. Other studios are already going to be leery of an already nightmarish IP to be involved with. The games industry almost never bets on losing horses. And if Mechwarrior 5 Clans was a bad game, I'd say, oh well, it's not good, who cares? But the game was great. The game still is really good. If you've not played it and want to enjoy a story-driven Mechwarrior game, pick it up. Jaden was an awesome main character, and Cordera Perez is the man! If you love Smoke Jaguar like I do, Flashstorm is brilliant too, outside of the caveat that I really think the end should have been you fighting and dying like Halo Reach or something, rather than it just being cut off. But that's beside the point, it's still a great game. But let's get back to what we were talking about. Mechwarrior 5's shortcomings means that Mechwarrior 6 is basically off the table at the moment, and probably for a while. Russ, in his interview, mentioned he feels the market may even be swamped at this point, oversaturated as it were, and he might even be right on the first-person shooter side of things. I think there is potential though. I think PGI could even get there one day. Maybe. We can all get somewhere one day. We're going to a farm up north, but that's beside the point. The real question is, where does this leave things now? First, they are going to make more DLC for Mercenaries, and maybe another DLC for Clans? But the latter was not promised by Russ. He did specifically mention a new Mercenaries DLC though. And not the recent Chaos Reign, but another one on top of that. But what about core games? DLC won't keep PGI around forever. Something has to move forward. And there are only a few options. And one option Russ discussed, even if very gently, I genuinely believe is the best hope for the video game side of the franchise. Now that I've got you caught up, let's get into the real thing I wanted to go over in this video. Mechcommander, first released in 1998 by FASA Interactive, is one of the long-lost cornerstone of the franchise's video game footprint from now, almost 30 years ago. It did have a sequel as well, in the form of 2001's Mechcommander 2. From what I was able to see from Mitch Geitelman on social media recently, he said that the two games had comparable sales to one another, but the second game was intended to grow the audience further, which it failed to do. This seems to be a common issue you'll find in most of the post-Mechwarrior 2 video games. Mechcommander as a game puts you in the role of a person following the titular role, in other words, being a Mechcommander. This changes the perspective of the game from Mechwarrior, where you're put in the seat of a battle mech, into being a coordinating officer on a dropship, basically. The gameplay ends up being an isometric real-time tactical game. You are mostly guiding your units to achieve tactical victories on the battlefield. It also differs from later games like 2018's HBS Battletech, that was itself in some ways a spiritual successor to Mechcommander, I should make clear, in that unlike this game, it was real-time instead of turn-based, meaning that quick decision-making was often required if a situation went awry, not giving players time to contemplate their moves to to the same degree as a turn-based game, like the aforementioned Battletech. Regardless of this, these games were, for me, spectacular. The original Mechcommander dealt with the fighting against Clan Smoke Jaguar in Operation Bulldog, and was a fun narrative with excellent scripted missions to fight through as you managed your mechs and forces both on the battlefield, but also in the mech bay between missions. The second game took place on Carver 5 during the rise of the Chaos March, and saw 3 campaigns to play, first working for House Steiner, then House Leal, and finally for the local people of Carver 5, who just so happened to be backed by House Davian. When it came to the games themselves and how they operated, as well as what hooked people into them, they allowed for pilots to progress, and for equipment to be customized on the mechs within reason. Mech configurations were simplified as well, with them being broken down between A, J, and W. A had more armor, J gave them jump jets, and W meant they had more weaponry. These made sure players had to sacrifice something in order to get something with every single mech. Unit composition was key to winning any battle, and mechs as well as pilots were chosen before each mission. There were often multiple ways of beating each mission as well, making some outside-the-box plans work far better than you might imagine. Using a light mech to leap over a wall, capturing the enemy's turret control and opening the gates could lead to hilarious engagements, even in later missions, where heavier mechs had, on their face value, more worth. The other option in many cases was to deploy your units as a heavily armored battering ram, and just shooting clean through targets, but at a higher cost, often in mechs and repairs. The soundtrack for both the first and second games were independently exceptional as well. The atmosphere, gameplay, and overall story were fire. I love Mechcommander, I still do. I tried a few years ago to keep Mechcommander Gold working, but even with the mods around it, it was really just unstable, and it was hard to get to work at the right resolution. Mechcommander 2 I really couldn't get off the ground in recent years either due to stability issues. These games are old. Some people are still apparently making it work though, and so I may have another crack at it at some point. Unlike HPS Battletech or Mechwarrior 5 though, these games did not offer generic missions through a sandbox system. The management end of things started with the campaign and ended with the campaign. For a lot of people, a direct new Mechcommander solely based on a linear story would not necessarily work. However, a Mechcommander game built on the principles of Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries and HPS Battletech might just capture an audience in the same way these titles have, even years later. If the Mechwarrior market is kind of at a plateau at the moment, with mostly plans for mercenaries and somewhat for clans to receive more DLC, and if HPS Battletech cannot be made for a huge list of reasons I won't dive into here once again, what can be done? Game worlds need to be fresh and can't afford to become oversaturated or stagnant. They also still need to offer things to people that they want, and that can also attract a market for more people to buy into them. You don't make a game, market it, and then drop it for the public for no reason. And here, today, I would argue to you in the short or medium term, in regards to new Battletech video game titles, the only way forward is Mechcommander. Whether that ends up actually happening is neither here nor there. But why would I argue all of this? It is because it captures an audience that has not been activated, that has been dormant for a very long time, not just amongst the Mechcommander fans, but also partially from the Harebrained Schemes Battletech fans as well. It also adds a new dynamic of play. While HPS Battletech does kind of tap into the XCOM style of gameplay, and Mechcommander isn't exactly that, it still gives a tactical edge that might attract a lot of those fans. It's the closest these folks will probably ever get to a Battletech 2, and that alone is huge. Now, is the tactics enjoying audience going to be as big as the 2 million or so people who bought Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries over the last decade-ish amount of time? Maybe? But it does still give the franchise an opportunity to try, because it's something that is legitimately different. There just isn't much on the market right now like Mechcommander either, and that alone might add real power behind this title. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of speculation here. I normally don't like to basically spend other people's money by speculating what they should do with their games, but I'm going to do that this time, just because I see so much potential here. Because most importantly to me, at least in my mind's eye, it gives the opportunity to Piranha Games to combine every solid element of the franchise over the last 30 years into one single incredible title. The unified ultimate Battletech experience, maybe. It can learn from every experience so far to create a game that could be timeless, and will draw people in like Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries and HPS Battletech before it. It can have a sandbox. It's not my personal favorite part of these games, but it is something that has shown that it can draw a large crowd. That is undeniable. People want to make their own mercenary unit. They want to fly around the inner sphere or the periphery like Battletech and Mechwarrior 5 doing jobs. But Russ kind of alluded to in his interview that the procedural generation of later versions of the Unreal Engine might be able to offer something that is really quite unique in this respect. It can create the opportunity to make these sandbox battles feel less repetitive and more challenging. In other words, it can make them much more exciting than previous iterations have been able to do. This would also give an opportunity for real-time combat that the current turn-based Battletech can't give us, adding an element of danger and responsiveness that I think people really want to see a return to on the tactics side of the games. It also gives the advancement path in these games a chance to be less restrictive. I mean that is to say, normally in Mechwarrior or Battletech you end up getting a bigger and bigger and bigger lance, especially by the end of these campaigns. But if this is built correctly, by allowing people to use clever tactics with lights and scouts to do as they were intended to do in universe, just like Mechcommander once did, then that can change. You could actually see a real alteration in terms of what configurations people bring to the field in this game. At the very least, things can be more dynamic in terms of how to build up an efficient lance, or hopefully 2 lances, or even a company. It can of course have a mech lab that allows people to customize their forces for the battlefield, just like Mechcommander and HBS before it, allowing for players to build once again forces that are tailored to their playstyles. It can add in light RPG elements like the former HBS Battletech. Its campaign can be built up, mission-wise, in the ways of the old Mechcommander, with handcrafted missions that challenge players to bring the right mix of mechs to solve their engagements, like solving a puzzle, while also adding in exciting events before, after, or during missions that involve intrigue, betrayal, and advancement. And as another important point, it can learn from the deeper storytelling seen in Mechwarrior 5 Clans, or, again, the later iterations of Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries DLC. Heck, if it's got multiple lances you control, like in the original Mechcommander, you could even do cooperative play, where one player controls one lance and another player controls another. That'd be crazy fun, like Dawn of War 2's old cooperative play system for its campaign. Micro-campaigns, side campaigns, full campaigns, and mechs can be further added to the game over time as well. This was all that was immediately coming to my mind as soon as Phil and Russ started to even talk about some of it. I could see a game that could be timeless if it learned the lessons from Mechwarrior 5, Mechcommander, and Battletech, and combined their various strengths into a single title. It would have everything: story, personal investment, action, tactics, and a sandbox gameplay loop. Would this thing sell well, though? If it was made well, I think it should. Admittedly, I thought Mechwarrior 5 Clans was going to sell well, but as mentioned prior, I think there were a lot of things that ended up working against it on launch. So to get back to my point, I believe that Mechcommander would be the next big Battletech title, if it comes out, and if it's done well. If it can strike the right tone like HBS once did, if it can offer us fantastic gaming experiences, why shouldn't it be a success? I say this and I mean it. Mechcommander 3 or what would just as likely just be called like Mechcommander, in my opinion, is the only true option on the table to give audiences something different and immersive as far as Battletech video games are concerned. I personally think that PGI could make this happen in a real way, but only if they want to, and only if they hear from fans that they'd want something like this as well. After that, hurdles would still need to be overcome, but they are manageable hurdles. None of these things have yet to happen. According to PGI, they've more or less whispered it, and that means very little as to if something would ever get made. They have no immediate plans. There is no engine driving this idea to market, but the hint of something worthwhile can be a powerful thing. I'm not going to give you the creator jargon at the end of this, of like and subscribe and stuff. Instead, I just want to say that over the years, there have been ups and downs with PGI, but I really do think in recent years their heart has been increasingly in the right place. I'd encourage people to share this video if you think Mechcommander should make a return. Hell, don't even do that. Just put your voice out there that you'd want to see Mechcommander, if that's something you indeed want, if what I'm saying here rings true with you. That will do more than anything to at least give attention to it. And I mean that in the sense of broader social media. Because I say this, and I hope this rings true. Mechcommander is the only path to anything in the short term for the video games, and we'd be incredibly lucky to get it. I'm also going to link No Guts No Galaxy's interview in the top pinned comment of this video. You should check it out. It's a 2-hour conversation, but I think it was good for the community at large who follows the video games to get an understanding of what is happening. I also realized while making this that Russ likely just hasn't moved on from the franchise for the same reason most people in BC and Vancouver can't move on from the Vancouver Canucks. Don't worry, one day we'll get the cup in Vancouver, Russ. One day.